So welcome everybody. It's 11 o'clock in the morning in South Florida. I'm in the Fort Lauderdale, Miami area. My name is Marlen, and it is such a pleasure to be here with all of you at this awesome conference. And again, I see so many friendly names and faces. It's very exciting. So with me today are a really awesome group of autoethnographers. And our whole purpose is to really address how did we get started? What were the major resources that we were utilizing that you yourselves may want to utilize as an autoethnographer, or that you may want to utilize when you mentor other autoethnographers? So essentially, this is a story. It's a story of seven happy people, right? And we all got introduced to autoethnography. So we're going to take you along our narrative journey. Each one of us is going to share a question with you. We encourage you to think about that question in your own experiences as an autoethnographer or when helping others with autoethnography. We're going to answer those questions and we're going to share some resources. In our chat room, I have just shared a Google Doc, and that lists our names and a brief overview of today's discussion. It has a short outline of the major questions that we're asking and discussing. And then we have all of the major resources that we've referred to throughout our discussion today. So again, my name is Marlen, and there are Emily is here, and Mary is here, Kendra is here, and Mavvy is here, Nicole is here, and Michele is here. So all together, again, we are now going to tell you about our story of autoethnography. So it all begins with this guy right here who has always loved storytelling. And when I got to my PhD in English, I was fortunate enough to work with an autoethnographer. And because I was a therapist, that was my background, and I worked in storytelling and poetry, narrative therapies and such, this really resonated for me. I thought, wait a minute, I get to have a voice? So my question, the start of our story is, how did I go from being an autoethnographer to deciding to teach and incorporate and encourage autoethnography for others? And there's one recurring theme that I've heard through many of the presentations over the weekend, and it's voice. It was the question of voice. I was just in a wonderful, wonderful workshop, panel. Catherine's here. She was part of that panel. And this issue of voice was coming up over, and we were very aware of voice in our research and why we share this research approach with others. And so in the world of English literary studies at the master's degree level in North America, students are generally taught close reading. Pick a text, pick a theoretical lens, apply the theoretical lens to the text, but don't be a part of it. Don't have a voice. Don't put yourself into it. This is not about you. This is about the text and the author and the theory. However, the seven of us, right, have understood, wait a minute. If you chose the topic and you chose the theory and you chose the text, then aren't you influencing that scholarship? So why would we pretend? And then second of all, you know you picked that topic because you love Little Women and Louisa May Alcott. How are you going to pretend you don't have a relationship with Little Women? So I started to understand as, yes, exactly. Thumbs up for Louisa May. We have an Alcott scholar in our group this morning, depending upon where you are. And so again, like most of you, for me, that decision was so obvious. I was seeing students producing scholarship that was reflective of their lived experiences, but it was completely author evacuated. Isn't that a great term? Author evacuated. And so I began to think, well, okay, I was coming from applied and social linguistics. So I began to question, well, what does this all look like when we transpose it to literary studies? So I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Kendra. Kendra, I'll let you introduce yourself and your research, and I'll let you introduce your question.
Hi there, everybody. My name is Kendra. I completed my thesis and earned my master's in English literature this last summer. My primary interest as an academic is in the impact of literature on society, specifically at the intersections of gender, sexuality, and community. My thesis project was also my first introduction to autoethnography under Marlen's instruction. And today I'm going to share some of my first thoughts as I learned about autoethnography. So the question we're addressing today is, what were my first thoughts and how did I feel getting into this new way of thinking, way of writing? So initially, writing autoethnographically was a struggle. I found myself fighting to speak in a voice that acknowledged my connection and relationship to my research materials in the majority of my writing sessions. Largely because, as Marlen mentioned, my years of academic training prior to my thesis project were centered on using that objective, author-evacuated academic voice. I had much more practice writing as though I was analyzing my subject from a distance and less from a perspective of interacting with my subject or even acknowledging that the understanding and beliefs I held about my subject were intrinsically influenced by my experience and beliefs as an individual. As I got into autoethnography as a methodology, I realized how counterintuitive it felt for me to try to write so objectively in my previous work. The things that I researched my entire academic practice and career were chosen because they hold personal meaning and interest for me. Even when writing for assignments that I may not have chosen to pursue on my own, the answers and essays that I crafted came from a place of curiosity and connection that I arrived at through my own personal exploration of the text in question. I was always the filter through which any material passed before I turned around and built my analysis. In her article, Easier Said Than Done, Writing in Autoethnography, Dr. Sarah Wall with the University of Alberta remarks on her experiences confronting similar feelings as she began in autoethnography. In detailing how an initial draft of a previous work progressed towards a final version, she states, quote, "I have a comfortable familiarity with the conventions of my academic discipline and tend toward working within them, even when attempting to include myself overtly in my work," end quote. This feeling was overwhelmingly present within myself as I began, and it took effort, intention, and a willingness to fail to overcome it. As we came together on this presentation, my colleagues and I shared our thoughts and experiences in beginning with autoethnography, and we discovered some common themes. We were all largely new to the practice when we began our thesis projects. Many of us confronted feelings of vulnerability and doubt as we learned and developed this new form of analysis. And on the whole, we found that interrogating our subjects through an autoethnographic lens also forced us to interrogate ourselves. I usually associate feeling vulnerable with writing creatively or engaging in writing that is less academic. I think that bringing yourself to any work, especially a work that is intended to be a part of a larger conversation or invite criticism of any kind, is intrinsically vulnerable. Engaging in autoethnography almost felt more so, because I was revealing and analyzing truths about my personal experiences and insights in a forum that was designed to comment on them in a professional and academic capacity. The idea of not only sharing these thoughts and experiences, but considering them to be credible evidence for my research took some effort. As I worked, I grew to appreciate autoethnography as an academic practice because it acknowledges the researcher's role and connection not only to the material, but to the resulting analysis and arguments. I also started to find that autoethnography encouraged a stronger sense of responsibility in myself as a researcher, because the autoethnographer cannot be distant from the work. I was discovering that I was a present and active speaker within autoethnography, no longer commenting on something from the outside. Instead, I was allowing myself to be seen. That felt really vulnerable when I got started, and it took a lot of time before I was comfortable just kind of sliding into my writing sessions and getting started. But when we got there, it was really rewarding. And I will go ahead and pass to Mary, who I believe is next.
So I'm just going to, for a second, remind folks that are coming in that in our chat room, we're sharing a document that lists all of the resources we are discussing today. I'll introduce our next speaker, Mary. And Mary is going to talk about what kinds of resources did she utilize when she first got started learning about autoethnography.
Hi, everybody. So I'm Mary. Um, and I am answering the question what resources I used when I first started as soon as I learned about autoethnography. So, of course, one of my best resources is Marlen, but we did not have the time to dig in as far as I needed to dig in. And so, and I had no idea what autoethnography was at all. I knew what ethnography was, but that's as far as I had ever gotten. And so I went to Google. Of course, I went to Google. And the first thing that pops up is a definition by the American Psychological Association, just a little brief blurb, which helped a little. But then I went to JSTOR, of course, to look through journals and just see the amount of resources I could find, which was actually shocking to me since I had never heard of this practice. And I tried to find things that were about autoethnography and then also written in the style. The first piece I found was called Autoethnography, an Overview, written by Carolyn Ellis, who I have now heard speak and seen here, which is amazing, as well as another paper called just Autoethnography by Paul Hackett. Both helped me realize some things, but it dug in more to the science and the style of writing and what's important about it. But I still needed more. So I read papers written by my mentors and others, which I found helped me create a more concrete idea of what I was being asked to do. But it wasn't until I found in the Journal of Autoethnography's A Good Autoethnography, written by Tony Adams and Andrew Herman. And at the end, it says the connective tissue between the auto, ethno, and graphy is the idea that you, the researcher, are the research tool. Your mind, body, instincts, intuition, interests, emotions, experiences, perspectives, values, and beliefs, and everything else makes you a one-of-a-kind research instrument. We want to experience the world through your senses, your voice, and we want to learn about topics that you find worthy of your attention and energy. That was the permission I needed to explore this new frontier. Now, I'll just tell you a little bit about my world and how I came into how autoethnography helped me after Marlen revealed its existence to me. So when I was a kid, reading and writing were a nightmare for me. That I tried to avoid it at all costs. And then I was diagnosed with dyslexia, and I learned how to cope with those syndromes, those symptoms, and I fell in love with reading. It became my passion. And in college, I found myself in English class after English class, falling deeper and deeper in love with the printed word. After I graduated, a wrench was thrown in my plans when my grandmother had a stroke and I became her primary caregiver. So 5 years later, I needed something to pursue and just for me. I struggled to find that one thing until I was called to look at that shelf and the glimmering future that sat upon it. And there my graduate aspirations sat. And I took them down and I started my journey. Many research papers later, I slid into my capstone with just a tiny bit of confidence and a lot of fear. And I felt like an imposter, and all of us have said this. And like there had been a mistake made, and that my grades were some sort of mistake, or that I wasn't actually eligible. And thankfully, Marlen was there to calm me down. And as we discussed my thoughts and my love of literature, he opened the door to autoethnography. So he explained the basics. I did all of this research, and then I dove into my thesis. So autoethnography gave me the outlet I needed to write about how literature affected me personally as a young adult. And I had always been told that the writer of a research project should never be seen in the writing. There should be no noticeable opinions and no anecdotes, only the bare facts. And I was so confused by that line of thought because the act of writing a research paper is to have an opinion about something. Even as I wrote my thesis through autoethnography, I found myself having to be reminded that I was part of the process. Without me, there is no paper, there is no opinion. And through autoethnography, I was given that badly needed freedom that helped me to understand that I am evidence. My experiences are not irrelevant, but part of a life being lived that is affected by everything from the grass under my feet to my favorite author creating a new book. I was finally able to put the I in my work and not be shamed for it, and not be shamed to have the audacity, and I was proud to do so. Thank you.
So now I have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, and I'm happy to introduce Emily. And again, just a reminder for those folks that are just joining us, in our chat room is a document that has all of the resources we've been talking about. So you've got the full MLA or APA references, and we're excited there. Emily, take it away.
Hi, all. As a graduate student, I got into my classes as the student who, 37 years old, decided, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go get my master's degree because I love literature. I was working as a high school English teacher, and I was really excited to be able to bridge the gap between secondary education and post-secondary, and wondering, what am I going to be able to be a professional at this age? So as I finished up with my master's degree and I got to my thesis, it felt so right to be able to walk in and do everything that I had been doing, which is that close reading. And as I did, and I was introduced to autoethnography, it was such a shift. It was something that I really felt kind of rocked my world. So my question to you all is, what challenges did you have, or do you still currently have whenever you write or conduct autoethnography? And for me, it's centered around the I, which many of us have already spoken about, but it also, for me, it invited the question, how do I tell my story? How do I uncover and reveal parts of myself that actually, when become public, it allows me to have my voice, but my voice had been silent for so long that it still is it's very, very hard for me. So as a high school English teacher, I actually moved into a new role. I'm an instructional coach at my school district in Southern Louisiana. And at the district level, I am privy to many conversations between teachers, between school level leadership and district level leadership. Very intimidating for me walking out of my classroom. So in that, and I was presented with my thesis, my capstone thesis, Marlen asked me, what is your specialty? What have you been working on for this long, and how is it going to serve you in your next role and current role? So I really had to ask that question to myself. So I landed on writing a thesis about using writing and scriptotherapy for teachers. So my writing for autoethnography had to uncover parts of my professional self that implicated both students, teachers, and again, those district level leadership, and also my family. So parts of that are still very daunting. I have not shared my scholarship with anyone at my schools, or even anyone above me, even though I have very close relationships with them and I trust them. That's not something I'm ready to do. However, I have shared it with my family. So my autoethnography begged the question, to how do I become vulnerable but still protect, and what ethics are there within that. So I was able, through many of the resources that were already already shared, for it's Ellis Adams and it's at Bochner, the Autoethnography and Overview, that gave me some really great framing for much of my work. And I was able to conduct my research without implicating names, without allowing too much of my experience to bleed into what would be permissive for my subjects, especially for students, and especially for my family. I even spoke about my son experiences as a teacher, traumatic experiences with my own family involved. So it became a comfortable space. I was able to do that. But another challenge that I have was to believe in myself and to move into past the idea that I did not have something to contribute, and to trust that it was a valid research practice. So by actually using journaling, by writing, almost conducting my own autoethnography on myself, I walked that journey of marrying my research with my experiences. And that enabled me to resist those dominant methodologies. That journaling, that reflexive practice gave me that identity that I think I craved. It taught me so much about myself, and that experience of how am I doing? I kind of conducted those experiences on myself, and what do I need at this moment? Even as a teacher or as a researcher, how do I get through the trauma of what I did to be able to serve myself in this writing? So it definitely enabled me to have a layered account of my research, also past experiences. But I'm noticing now that as I continue that practice, that I have more to offer as an autoethnographer, and we'll talk more about mentoring and the graduate experience. But overall, my challenge is, as I worked through going through the literature, the autoethnographer as a resource to me, going and exploring other people's stories. It was the stories that gave me, sorry, that's my reminder to be quiet and move on. But I do want to thank Marlen for that experience, because it has become such a beautiful, life-changing experience, and giving me the tools to become a scholar in my own right. So I will hand it off. Thank you.
Awesome. So I just want to remind folks that are joining us that there's a great document in our chat room that lists all of these resources that we're mentioning. And at the end of our story, we will definitely have an opportunity to have questions and for you all to share some of your own ideas and resources and experiences as well. So don't worry, we have made time for that as well. And we'll even talk about some of those resources that we've recommended in that list that we haven't mentioned yet. So I do believe Michele is next to talk a little bit now. Is that not right? Let me see. Let me check the schedule. Yeah. Mary, Emily, Michele. Lovely. So I will turn it over to our Louisa May scholar. Oh, Michele, you need to unmute first. Bottom left, there you go.
That would help. Hi, I'm Michele Ainsworth, and I'm here to talk about resources that I used to create my master's thesis on autoethnography. In my thesis, my goal was to show how I found my feminist self through literature, Louisa May Alcott, and my lifelong desire to create something like a book or artwork. So I chose first to incorporate collage in my theses, which I never understood how to do without utilizing the Autoethnographer by Dr. Marlen Harrison, the online literary arts magazine. And I would flip through it for hours, going through article, do article, and I see nodding faces, Emily, yes. And I did a collage in my theses, and I would have never have done this. So my autoethnography has given my 60-year-old self, a baby boomer, the first sense that I am a feminist. And it gave me agency. Agency was a word I used on all my courses that I did in grad school on every female author. And it was during a phone call that I was talking to Marlen, and I'm like, well, I went to the movies and I wore a red coat that was very Victorian, like, Louise May Alcott. And he's like, and I was drawing. I took my camp trunk to try to write, in my bedroom. He's like, Michele, look at yourself. Listen to yourself. It's Louise May Alcott. So yes. And since then, I will tell you that I am a member of the Louise May Alcott Society. I've been to the Modern Language Association conference. I have been to a conference on female literature at the Louise May Alcott House, and I have told the director, who is featured on Greta Gerwig's DVD on the extras, who actually acts as Louise May Alcott, who portrays her, about it, and she's like, tell me more. So FYI. So basically, there was a second, besides the autoethnographer, Marlen and I were on a phone call, and I was just talking to him about finding resources. And he's on Google searching on books. And I'm like, I don't even know how to do Google search. I'm child of the 60s. So we found this book, or Marlen found this book called Writing Feminist Autoethnography in Love with Theory, Words, and the Language of Women Writers by Elizabeth McKinley. And if I tell you, this book has changed my life. It really, really has. And for any feminist writer, I most definitely. She uses autoethnography in here. First, let me tell you a little bit about her. She is a professor at the University of Queensland. She calls herself a white settler woman among the Aboriginal people. And her former husband was a member of the Aboriginal. Her children, her two boys are Aboriginals, but she is a, quote, white settler woman. So a white settler colonial woman in relation to the Aboriginal people. So basically, she threads chapters in here with using letters in the epistolatory method, letter writing, to Virginia Woolf. Every other chapter is a letter to Virginia Woolf. And in between, she goes to feminist writers. And one of those letters, she does a lot with Hélène Cixous. And I wish I had this book before I took Lit Theory and first read Cixous' The Laugh of the Medusa, because Elizabeth brings this to life. And what she does is, in autoethnography, is that phone calls and a play with Cixous, and all of Cixous' lines are autoethnography from her works. So Elizabeth is answering to Cixous by, this is how she uses. So it's a phone call and then it's a play. Like Hélène calls her up, want to meet me in the garden? Let's go talk. I have some oranges to show you, And so they go into the garden at the university and they talk about oranges, but oranges was part of the Laugh of the Medusa because oranges was Algeria. And so that's, so I would never, I look at Laugh of the Medusa so differently now that I read this book. So that's it. She does a whole play with her. And then every other chapter is letters to to Virginia Woolf. And then she goes bell hooks, right? So we all know bell hooks, and Elizabeth Clare tells us that bell hooks was an avid diary user, right? Agency to write your own words. And since then, since reading this book, this is what I've done also, is to write my own words. And she uses autoethnography to actually recreate the conversation. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Love Actually with Emma Thompson, the Christmas movie. She actually recreates that scene where Emma Thompson has found out her husband. She's discovered that the bracelet is not for her, it's for his girlfriend. She finds out, she realizes her husband's got a girlfriend. And he's just given her, instead of a gold piece of jewelry, he's given her a Joni Mitchell tape. And she goes upstairs and she's standing there crying, and she's got Joni Mitchell. And her husband comes into the room and he's like, "Who's that?" And Elizabeth turns around and she says, it's bell hooks, and I love her. And the husband turns back and disappears. And this, she brings this in with the scene of her former husband, who apparently is in a maximum security prison. She doesn't mention what he did, but it was one of those catastrophic tragedies that we'd say people have to go away. And so she still lives with his, she's part of the Aboriginal people. She says, I am not Aboriginal, but she is very close to the woman who bore her former husband, her mother-in-law, and she has 2 sons. She doesn't go into the crime, but she says this is how she brings it in, by bringing in bell hooks. And she says, it's bell hooks and I love her. She saved my life. She also has chapters on Simone Weil, Kathleen Stewart, Ruth Baer, Ursula Le Guin, and Simone de Beauvoir. What brought me into the idea of doing collage was that interspersed in the book, this is a rag doll and pictures that she has drawn of Hélène Cixous. So this is what made me, with the rag doll and that, and then other pictures like her. This is, I can't see if you can see it, but it's her sitting, sending a flower, giving a flower to Hélène Cixous. And this is what made me want to do artwork. And what I did was I did a scene from Little Women, showing the scene where I don't know if you know the film, but Amy and Laurie are on the water. And
Michele, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but just so we can get our next speakers in, I'll ask you just to wrap it up.
So anyways, I took that scene of Amy and Laurie on the water and him asking her to spend the rest of his life with her. And I did that with the word agency, so that I can go on sailing my life through with feminism and agency.
And that was a gorgeous way to wrap that up. Yeah, lovely. So again, I do want to acknowledge there was a great question in our chat room from Jen. And when after we have 2 more speakers, Mavvy and Nicole. So once they finish up, we'll come back to your question, Jen, and any other questions that are in the chat room. I did want to acknowledge, just to kind of recognize how all of us are working within the field of literary studies, yet we're finding various ways to connect ourselves to our practices, to connect ourselves to texts. And we encourage you at this time in listening to us tell you about our experiences to think a little bit about your connections with your meaningful favorite texts, right? You don't have to share anything right now. When we come back and we open up questions, we can start to talk a bit more about that. Or practices, certain practices that you have that you feel are very important, important part of you, important part of how you understand yourself, perhaps even. So with that, I will introduce our next speaker, Mavvy.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Mav, and I was also a late grad student. Um, but I was introduced to autoethnography while I was working on my MA thesis. And Marlen was my thesis advisor. And when we first met to discuss topics, he surprised me by encouraging me to look at the most lowbrow of my options, which was detective fiction. I had been looking at Marjorie Kemp or Elizabeth I or something like that. And so I was really surprised. He then suggested that I take an autoethnographic approach, and this completely readjusted how I developed my thesis. Marlen was also the first academic who tried to convince me that my ideas had real value. He assured me I could meaningfully contribute to the body of scholarship and that my ideas were worth taking seriously. In developing more deeply into autoethnography and its application to scholarly research, I discovered that the intersection of my human experiences with literary characters, plots, and imagery resulted in a unique perspective that no one else could provide. The history of our species is reflected in literature across the ages, and that literature, in turn, serves as an invitation to ask, why do people do what they do? And why do they react and feel like they do? Through any form of creative output, we gain insight into the nuances of human nature and the human experience overall. When we as scholars open the door to our own experiences and responses, we cannot help but add to the overarching conversation. By contributing my own insights based on my personal history, I am able to create an entirely new lens through which to explore even the most thoroughly examined works. Incorporating autoethnography into my MA thesis was a natural process for me, since my topic was in large part chosen because of my personal history as a reader and a writer. I grew up surrounded by detective fiction, and the core of my appreciation for detective fiction was my juvenile attempt to understand human beings. I tried to reason through the social rejection I was experiencing, becoming an accidental student of human character, and in detective fiction, I found stories that explored and illuminated the motivations and emotions of the people around me. Even now, the literature that most engages me focuses on the fundamentals of human nature. Because I was a social outcast growing up, these stories gave me an understanding of the human experience that I could not get from my peers. I am sure that countless scholars before me have been frustrated by the wish to find a new angle from which to attack an old favorite, only to give up on the idea of finding fresh insight. Autoethnography allows us to step away from the analysis of these familiar passages and look instead at the why behind their enduring legacy. It helps to illustrate how interpretations of literature have changed based on both the shifts in social attitudes over time and disparities in personal experience and knowledge. We can begin to explore the facets of humanity revealed in a text. And in doing so, we not only connect with the work on a more intrinsic level, but we also lend a new legitimacy and validation to our own experiences as readers. Even the often cited imposter syndrome cannot hope to stand firm against the undeniable truth of our own lived experience. In hearing from the other presenters at this symposium, I've been struck by the compassion of autoethnography. It validates our individual perspectives without serving as a stage for our egos. In other words, it's not all about me. Our experiences inform our research without overpowering it. We do not take center stage, no matter how personal and revealing the work becomes. Autoethnography celebrates the individual within the context of the human experience, allowing us to be both together and unique at the same time. It also strikes me that all interpretations of literature are inherently autoethnographic to some extent, since our insights and perspectives cannot help but be influenced by our personal experiences, knowledges, and ingrained biases. It is our understanding of the subject matter that is applied to the literature, and our interpretations of an author's intent are reflections of our own life and experience. Autoethnography offers validation to each of us as scholars and as members of a wider human community. And that cannot help but encourage new generations of academics to dig deeper and discover more about who we are and how we express it in both literature and life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mavvy. And so we're going to go full circle. When I started this, I introduced myself and talked a little about the panel. We asked the question, why would an instructor include autoethnography in a humanities research course? And specifically, we are part of a MA English program through Southern New Hampshire University. And we are talking specifically about the MA thesis capstone course that students must take to complete their education. We have the word critical in our title of this panel. And I hope that as we've listened to each speaker, we've begun to understand why we chose that word critical. It seems with each conversation, there is some discussion of power and identity for each individual. And that was hugely powerful for me when I got started as an autoethnographer. And I think that is one of the main reasons why I feel so strongly about telling thesis students, hey, I know you probably have some ideas, but you know what? You probably don't know what you don't know. Can I tell you about some other methods that you might want to explore? And students are often like, I don't know. I mean, I kind of and I have to work. I got 97 kids and all 87 parents are dying. I just can't do anything new now. And then as we kind of introduce it and it unfolds, and sometimes classmates see other classmates doing autoethnography and they come back and they're like, wait a minute, she's writing a graphic novel where she's the character? You can do that? So the number of times students have said to me, wait, you can do that with autoethnography, right? Michele, wait a minute. I can make a collage for a thesis? Are you sure? Right? And then the number of times Emily would come back and she'd be like, this is getting really personal. Am I allowed to do this? And, we've heard about how autoethnography is accommodating all of this. And it's been such a privilege to be able to introduce autoethnography to others. So to wrap everything up, I'd like to introduce you to Nicole, who has gone from being a graduate literary student to writing an autoethnography to becoming a published autoethnographer and is now volunteering to mentor new autoethnographers in our Master's in English program. Nicole?
Hello, everyone. I'm Nicole. Yes, so I'm going to talk about what it was like to move from autoethnographer to autoethnography mentor. And it's been quite an adventure. When I started out at the end of my master's class, and Dr. Harrison brought up autoethnography, and I realized I didn't even know what autoethnography was. I thought, how can you get to the end of a graduate program and not know what this method is, right? So of course I took to researching it. And of course I went to the autoethnographer and I read through so many different autoethnographies to get an idea, and really took to the books to understand what autoethnography was. And I realized right away that this was for me. I was always interested in cultural studies, and I was going to be focusing in on a crisis in education that was happening within my own classroom as an English teacher. And I thought, well, what a better way to research this issue than to bring in my own personal experiences and what I'm witnessing into this research, because we are never evacuated, whether we want to say we are or not, we are there. So to just call it what it is just the better approach, in my opinion, because our bias, our where we position ourselves within that issue that we are exploring, it shows, and there's that transparency. And so when I went to transition to mentoring, I really had to think about, well, what are the unique characteristics of autoethnography, and how can I give feedback, critical feedback for mentees. How am I going to do this? And so I kind of I came up with 5 critical features that really help me when guiding students when writing autoethnography. And so these are the 5 that I've identified. So a theoretical or contextual framework where we identify our personal narratives and how they fit into the broader cultural and academic worlds, conversations that are happening. Reflexivity. We have to recognize, where do we position ourselves within this issue and what are our biases, right? That's important to reflect on our work. Vivid description. There are narratives all throughout autoethnography, and that's what makes it so engaging. That's what makes us want to read autoethnography and reach a wider audience, because it is so engaging. So we need that vivid description. We need the dialogue. We need the imagery. We need good writing. And so then we move to ethical considerations, because when we're telling personal stories, we are constantly intersecting with others' lives. And when we intersect with others' lives, we have to understand the ethical implications. How are we bringing them into our work? And then, of course, the narrative research balance. If you do not have that balance with research, then this is no longer research. And in order to be a valid autoethnography, we have to be able to frame our personal stories within the academic sphere, into the current day research that is surrounding these topics. And so that's really important, that we can contribute to scholarship that exists, fill those gaps, and just really challenge the topic that exists in the academic sphere at the moment in current day. So, I mean, we can see that as we move towards this, in bringing autoethnography into literary studies, into the master's program, I mean, opening up to these methodologies is really, it's changing things. It's including more diverse voices. It's allowing for a more nuanced version of research, and it's just as valid because you have the research, but you add this personal component that is in the background somewhere anyway, so we might as well acknowledge it and speak to it. And so I'm so excited. I know that mentoring has really just reaffirmed and just my belief in power in autoethnography and the validity of autoethnography. And I plan on being part of the conversations within autoethnography from here on out, because this is something that has really opened up my world. And I really thank Dr. Harrison for introducing me to autoethnography, even if it was late, late in my education. I really just it's been something that's been so enlightening and important to me.
Thank you, Nicole. And this is something that we keep coming across, is the idea of autoethnography as a gift. I certainly feel it was a gift, and it's a gift I want to keep sharing. And I know for many of you, it's a gift that either you're now realizing, hey, this is a gift, I want to explore it, or you are helping others understand this gift, this unshackling of the hegemonic discourse of what scholarship must be, right? So I want to come back to our chat room. We have some great comments here that I want to get into. The first was a wonderful question from Jen. And Jen said she's right at the beginning of her experience, and she's wondering how she might find the wider meaning and insight in her experience. I'm right at the beginning and wondering, how do I find the wider meaning and insight in my experience? Would anyone, even our participants, non-panelists, if you'd like to jump in and offer some insight there?
I can speak to that a little bit. I think that when you are looking for that sort of key into accessing your personal connection to whatever it is you're researching, I think you have to look at, why am I interested in this? And also, what are the elements within this, the specific elements that speak to me? Because those elements that speak to you are almost assuredly connected in some way to your personal experience and your background. And so if you reflect on that, if you reflect on your connection to the piece, your connection to the subject matter, whatever it happens to be, really, you can then get that sort of key to understanding why you're connected to it, how you're connected to it, and then bring that element, that portion of yourself into the dialogue.
Go for it, Jen. Thank you, Mavvy.
Hi, so I'm a PhD student, so obviously I'm graduate as working in a graduate capacity as well. I'm working in the field of medicine and health sciences, and I very much describe myself as living on the lunatic fringes as an autoethnographer in that field. And I've actually found it really useful to approach my literature review from an autoethnographic perspective as well. So I've deliberately used an insider perspective and justified that through the kind of the marginalized group that I'm a part of because I'm disabled, their voices being excluded from research, but also, as I think people have said, your experience is a lens through which you can judge the, but not validity, but the meaning that can be drawn from a particular paper. That somebody who doesn't have that lived experience or kind of like an objective systematic approach, there's a lot of emphasis on systematicity in medicine and health sciences, but that lens actually allows you to see value and understand the literature field as it stands at the moment. And I found that's a good way of kind of linking in your experiences and your thinking with the wider field to get those links in with the wider culture. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's how I've approached it at the stage I'm at.
Emily?
I would also venture, Jen, to really explore your self-journaling. It's something that it really added to my experience to be able to connect a lot of my research with how I was, I guess, interpreting things. And especially for you in your lived experience, the value there really began to reveal itself to me as I began to unwind in my own words. So that may be helpful as well.
Thank you, guys. So I'm just jumping back into the chat room. There's just a shout out from Marie. She's a current PhD student. She's doing an autoethnography in the field of music, and she was wondering if anybody knew of any connections around postdoctoral positions in that field specifically. So she's asking, has anyone done a postdoc related to autoethnography music, or is anyone looking for someone to contribute to research? And she shared her email in our chat room if anyone can help Marie network. Again, the gifts keep giving. Polly has asked us to go deeper on the concept of critical, right? And again, the reason why I chose the concept of critical is because I was understanding that each of us was working with concepts around power and identity. And that's where I started with my own PhD research around language and identity and autoethnography around concepts of human sexuality and language identity. But would other panelists like to speak a little bit about their understanding of why their work is critical, and perhaps how people that are coming to autoethnography and they've been told you need to do a critical autoethnography, how do we interpret that? What does that mean?
I'll speak to that. Oh, you want to go, Mary? You can go.
Oh, well, I was just going to say that I found once we had our discussion and I really figured out what some of my autoethnography was going to be about, and mine was young adult literature, and how as a young adult I got the gift of religious enlightenment through young adult literature. And I really found that there was practically nothing on religiality in young adult literature. And so for me, I was looking at that and I was like, why isn't anybody asking this question? So for me, I think that I kind of found that little niche of being critical, and also finding a good handhold in research that had meaning to me and would have meaning to others because there was no real research in religion in young adult literature, and a lot of papers say it's the last frontier. Nobody's putting it in. Nobody's like it, or it's not even present in religious, in young adult literature. And I was like, just because it's not overtly stated does not mean that it's not there. So that's one of the things that I really found when looking at my own stuff.
Thank you, Mary. And then, so by way of wrapping up, we have about 2 minutes. I know, Nicole, I don't want to put any pressure on you, but we'll have Nicole wrap this up for us.
Okay, so I was just going to talk about the critical aspect. I wrote about what was going on in education. I am a 11th and 12th grade English teacher in South Florida. I work at a private school, a private high school. And there was a lot of research about what was going on politically in this environment. However, what I noticed is that we were not getting the microscopic view of it, the subcultures within the wider culture. And so my work really focused on what does this look like in an upper class in an area, and I looked at that at a microscopic level, looking at my classroom and my students and what was going on in our world and how this was impacting them. And I didn't see any scholarship related to that particularly. And I really wanted to explore that. And so when you think critical, you think of something that, for me, it was as a social justice advocate to speak out about what is going on in our world and the cultural implications.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining us. Nicole, you've gotten some kudos for your 5 points. Nicole said that she would include it in the Google Doc. We are hoping to put this together for publication at Journal of Autoethnography. So hopefully we'll see Nicole's points shared there as well in that forthcoming article. Thank you all for joining us. Congratulations to my co-presenters. I'm so proud of you. You did a beautiful job. If you have any questions, do please feel free to reach out. We would love to stay in contact. Have a great conference, everybody. Thank you.